West of the mountain green lies Rutland Fair, the best that e'er was seen for soil and air. Kind zephyrs' pleasant breeze whispers among the trees, where men may live at ease with prudent care. To Rutland go, Thomas Rowley, 1721 to 1796. Welcome to Main Street Park, established in 1790. The park was the center of the community at this time. Shops lined the north side of West Street and the east side of Main Street, where there was a courthouse, hotel, and post office. In 1852, this is the intersection of West and Main Streets, east of the park. On the left, we see the Protective Union store on the north side and the Francis Fenn Druggist on the south side. The 1792 courthouse dominates the skyline. South of the courthouse is the Franklin House, a leading hotel of the stagecoach era. Not long after this photo was taken, business activity migrated to its present locations on Merchants Row. Statue in Main Street Park. This statue, erected in 1915 by the Daughters of the American Revolution, commonly mistaken as a tribute to Ethan Allen, is actually in honor of all the Green Mountain Boys. When a New York sheriff leading 300 militiamen attempted to take possession of Grant's Farms in 1771, he met with strong resistance. A determined group of Bennington militia led by young firebrands Ethan Allen and Remember Baker blocked his efforts. Several Grant towns then organized committees of safety and military companies to protect their interest against the Yorkers. These military groups called themselves the New Hampshire Men, while New York authorities referred to them as the Bennington Mob and rioters. By 1772, they were called the Green Mountain Boys. When they continued to terrorize, beat, and burn out Yorkers, the governor of New York offered rewards for their capture and then said he wanted them sentenced to death. In response, their leader, Ethan Allen, declared they were fighting for their liberty, property, and life, thereby linking the Grant's cause to America's fight with Britain. The Green Mountain Boys went on to play pivotal military roles in the independence of Vermont and America's revolutionary cause. later generations of Rutland would also recall the information booth, which was a go-to place for Rutland information for many decades. Center Street. It was the first bank in Rutland and the fourth bank in all of Vermont. In 1825, 1 year after it was incorporated, it moved its headquarters facing Main Street Park. Since the Civil War, it had been used as a storage barn, art school, church, and at one time also the Rutland Historical Society. The subject of this 1831 Ashiel Powers painting has been tentatively identified as Dr. Joel Green. As you may notice, he holds a Bank of Rutland note made payable to him and signed by William Page. The Rutland Railroad's beginnings date back to the Champlain and Connecticut River Railroad in 1843. The humble 400-mile-long line serviced Vermont and northern New York State. In the 1850s, the railroad came to Rutland, and in the next few years, the center of the community was thriving in its present downtown location. By the early 1960s, the railroad had largely lost its power, succumbing to a long list of woes from labor issues, economic downturn, and the loss of industry in the northeastern U.S. Most of the Rutland Railroad trackage in Vermont was acquired by the state in 1963 and subsequently leased to the Vermont Railway in 1964 and the Green Mountain Railroad in 1965. Both railroads continue in operation today as part of the Vermont Rail System. 96 Center Street. By 1902, the chief engineer reported that the manual force had 8 permanent and 20 on-call men. Their equipment consisted of 1 steam fire engine, 1 65-foot aerial hook and ladder truck complete, 2 hose wagons, 4 horses, and various lengths of cotton hose. The expenses for running the department included food, shoeing, and veterinary services for the horses. It also included fuel for the station and a new furnace for station number 2. Since 1993, Old Number 2 has been the home of not only the Rutland Historical Society, but its collection of various eras of Rutland and its people, from present day dating all the way back to our founding. It's an extensive collection of life, love, friends, family, and neighbors. We live with the stories and in the stories. A community of many with the spirit of one. The northeast corner of Court and Center Streets. The Federal Courthouse, from 1856 to 1935, helped to decide many cases ranging from serious crimes to whimsical ones, such as a fine for not paying a ticket on a misparked horse. The Rutland Free Library was started in 1886, originally housed in various storefronts and at the old Memorial Hall on West Street. The library would find a long-term home in the old courthouse and jail since 1935. In 1965, an addition was built, and in 1990, a second addition was completed. They include meeting rooms, book stacks, reading rooms, administrative offices, and storage. In fact, now might be a good time for your narrator to encourage you to stop by the library and check out a book. But be sure to avoid those late fees. The southeast corner of Court and Center Streets. In 1858, the Bank of Rutland built new headquarters across Center Street from the newly completed U.S. Courthouse. By 1867, it was sold to marble dealer John Reynolds, who remodeled it in a French Empire style. In 1919, John A. Meade donated it to the city for a community center. The Rutland Recreation Department became a place where swell youngsters could swim, lift weights, run up and down the court, and dance the bunny hop to the swingin'est tunes of the day. In modern times, it has become a private office building retaining its old world charm and wonderful memories to generations of Rutlanders. 8 Court Street, Grace Congregational Church. The church's congregation first gathered in 1788 as East Parish Congregational Church. And the current church building was completed in 1860 during the pastorship of Reverend Silas Aiken. Since then, the church building has undergone numerous renovations, including the organ being added in 1939 and the fellowship hall and church school wings being added in 1961. The northwest corner of Court and Center Streets. 83 Center Street, the Rutland County Courthouse. In 1870, this would be the last architectural commission of the great John Kane. John Kane, known not only as the designer of many Gothic Revival-style churches in the area, but also as the publisher of the Rutland Courier. The crowning cupola on top was moved around 1888 from the center of the roof to its present location. '81 Center Street, the Baptist Church. Across from the Moose Club, Knights of Pythias, was the Baptist Church, established in 1871. Unfortunately, the church caught fire twice in roughly a 12-month span. In 1932, workmen accidentally started a fire, and in 1933, the top of the church had been struck by lightning and suffered fire damage again. Despite those difficult times, the Baptist Church, like the other places on our tour, is a historic fixture of our community. '78 Center Street, the Sheldon House, 1860. Charles Sheldon, born in Rutland July 24, 1830, was a husband, father, town blacksmith, and farmer. He was also very active and successful in the marble industry. His home would go on to become the Knights of Pythias and eventually would become the Moose Club. '67 Center Street. This happens to be one of the very last wooden stores in downtown Rutland. Since it was built in 1865, it has proven to be a very versatile location, housing a variety of different businesses over its lifetime. The Rutland City Band marches by during another festive Rutland parade in the mid to late 1900s. The southeast corner of Wales and Center Streets. In 1867, downtown Rutland was in the middle of rapid commercial growth. On the east side of Merchants Row, we see from left to right the roof of the Crampton Block, the Daniel Verder Bakery, Landon and Bates Hardware Store, and in the Bates Building, the Balch Millinery Shop, the Hillard and Oaks Dry Goods Store, and the Prindle and Burnham Insurance Agency. Sadly, on July 2nd, 1868, all these buildings would fall victim to an arsonist. Much like Rutland, this location would bounce back. Later, the Verder Steam Bakery, built in 1869, would become Metzger's Awning Company, which would in turn become, as we know it today, the Brock Building. (56 to 58 Center Street), the commercial block. The expanding trolley system brought increasing numbers of shoppers and clients to the downtown Rutland area, where businesses prospered in the latter 1880s and 1890s. This building, built in 1869, is distinguished for its corner turret, the only such decorative feature found downtown. Its history is vast, as each generation has seen it in its own ways. Some saw it as the old Eagles Club. In the modern age, it has been seen as the Center Street Saloon, a place to unwind with friends, play darts, and laugh over a beer. But in the 1940s and 50s, it was a vintage slice of Americana. Changra's Pharmacy and Soda Fountain, where you knew the pharmacist by his first name, filled a prescription, and perhaps saw some youngsters enjoying a malt while shopping for one of those state-of-the-art cameras. On August 14, 1990, while renovating the storefront of the Center Street Saloon, the past saw the light of day once again, causing grandparents, including mine, to share their wonderful memories from that bygone era. The northwest corner of Wales and Center Streets. The hole in the ground. As some have referred to it in modern times, it's said not as a derogatory term, but more so to describe the physical location's look. Originally the Stevens House in 1868, later becoming the mighty Berwick Hotel. The Berwick was not only an important part of the downtown community in its lifetime, but it also was part of many historic moments. On October 8, 1912, President William Howard Taft was running for his second term as president. He was locked in a rough election that pitted him against Woodrow Wilson and his old friend and former president, Theodore Roosevelt. In 1932, presidential candidate, this new fella, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was greeted with a warm and hearty welcome. The Center Street Saloon can be seen in the background. The Berwick had delicious food, its own barber shop, and the mouth-watering Cinderella Sweets. Two instant memories about Cinderella Sweets. One, the sweet smells and smiles that would greet you at the door. And two, the candy shop was so clean, you could perform open-heart surgery in it. Youngsters of that era would get rock candy to enjoy while going to the Grand Theater on weekends. It was sure tough to decide between all the delicious treats, like the Boston Baked Beans, crisp peanut brittle, peanut butter fudge, or dark chocolate-covered caramels, just to name a few. Berwick would later be known as the Townhouse. In 1971, due to the lack of a fire detection system and much-needed repairs, the Vermont Fire Marshal ordered that these repairs be done, or the Berwick Townhouse Hotel would be forced to close. In the early morning hours of January 7th, 1973, the worst of all possible fears was realized. A fire began, and despite the constant and heroic efforts of the fire department, the Berwick Townhouse was destroyed, and several neighboring buildings were damaged. The lives of Anna McGurk, Albert Houghton, Jacqueline LaRose, Joseph Termel, and Harold Fuller were unfortunately lost. The total property damage was estimated to be over $1 million. When the sun arose, it saw what was left. Once proud and historic Berwick was encased in ice, plenty of wreck, ruin, and rubble. The Berwick was gone, vanished into the pages of Rutland history. The memories lived on, and in 1994, as part of the Rutland Herald's 200th year celebration, a wonderful mural was painted by Barbara Bosworth. The painting shows the downtown area, with everyday citizens enjoying Depot Park. Seen reading the newspaper, walking along as little children run and play. On June 3rd, 2013, it was decided that due to the weather, sunlight, and other aging elements, that the mural be taken down and preserved in a safe location. Center Street. This was the modern-day Paramount Theater. As seen here prior to 1913, it was a livery, more commonly known as a horse barn. In 1913, George Chaffee built a theater called the Playhouse. The exterior of the Playhouse had a classical style, reflecting the city's beautiful movement of that time, while the interior resembled a grand Victorian-era opera house with lavish decoration. The theater was renamed the Paramount in 1931, and its entertainment shifted from live performance to movies. The movie theater closed in 1975. In 1999, a local group began restoring the theater to its historic appearance. The theater reopened in March 2000 and serves again as a center for artistic, cultural, and educational events. Center Street. Originally the Tuttle Printing and Rutland Herald building, the latest news of the day passed into and out from this building. It would be destroyed in the horrific fire of 1906. Afterwards, it would be rebuilt and become the location for Monsat Jewelers. In the present day, she towers as a beautiful example of Rutland's can-do spirit. As we round the corner of our virtual walking tour, we look behind us at the Clement Bank building on 89 Merchants Row. Referred to by the youth of 1980s Rutland as the Clock Tower Bank, due to the clock tower's face being similar in style to that of the clock tower in the popular film Back to the Future. It's interesting to note that the fictional clock in the film was built in 1885, while our real-life clock tower was built in 1883. Originally the central house, the Clock Tower Bank has had many different banks inside it over the years. Since 1883, the building served some of the banking needs of Rutland while also watching the life of the town evolve around it. The Clock Tower Bank has seen us in peacetime. It's seen us in wartime. It sat by as we sent our boys off to war, and was there when we gave them a warm welcome home. It even watched when Theodore Roosevelt came to town, drawing a large crowd to Depot Park. One catastrophic event it bore witness to was the horrific downtown fire of 1906. The fire began in the Bates House, the present site of the Mead Building. Once the fire spread to the Combination Cash Store, also on Merchants Row, it was too late. Too late to save that portion of the block, despite the gallant efforts of a combination of fire department, police, our friends, families, and neighbors, all helping one another to tame the destruction. One of the reasons the aftermath looked much like a site after a bomb had been dropped was due in part to the explosive power added to the fire by the barrels of oil and varnish that were located in the Combination Cash Store. The fire leveled 6 business blocks, causing $700,000 in damage. That would roughly be $15 to $20 million in damage today. The Clock Tower Bank has become almost like the eye of downtown, watching the times change, the way we travel, communicate, and what are the current pop culture tastes of the community. Everything evolved around it as the clock tower stood. It's watched an entire community be born, live, love, marry, have children, retire, and die. Only one time in its 131 years of watching generations of us be born and grow up was the clock tower's eye given a short rest. Today, the Clock Tower Bank has various offices and is the home of TD Bank. '98 Merchants Row. We now turn back onto our tour, moving forward to the present-day Mead Building. Originally the Bates House, it would go through drastic changes after 2 horrible fires, one of which we just described. The first Bates House seen here decorated for the Rutland Centennial in 1870. By 1876, the first Bates House had burned down, but in 1877, the new Bates House was built with a classic mansard roof. Rutland was bouncing back, and it had a lot of optimism behind it. Originally, the Mead Building was going to be 4 floors, but John A. Mead reflected that optimism of Rutland and said, "No, let's make it 5 floors." Those 5 floors would grace the downtown skyline to this very day, with the top being slightly changed over that period of time. 104 to 108 Merchants Row. Originally the Rutland Savings Bank in 1865, the whole Morse block would eventually be purchased by the Rutland Savings Bank in the 1880s. The Rutland Savings Bank building witnessed Rutland in the trolley and horse-drawn carriage days. The Depot Park area became a bustling mecca of activity with the train station. The birth of the 20th century, where electricity was really coming into its own and the landscape became dominated by automobiles. It was a witness to the tragedy of the 1906 fire and joined us in greeting our boys during the World War II parade as it passed by. In 1953, the old roof was removed and another floor was added. Now the home of the Lake Sunapee Bank, the Rutland Savings Bank building stands proud, dignified, and strong. Looking good for 149 years young. .128 Merchants Row. In the 1870s, it was the Baxter Bank building, and it would serve generations of Rutlanders. By the second decade of the 20th century, Rutland entered an age of change, an age that would show the outside world knocking on our door. Merchants Row became more modernized. Posters hang in the storefronts on the far left, promoting an exhibition by the new boxing heavyweight champion of the world, Jack Johnson, to be seen at the Opera House, October 6, 1910. In 1930, it was replaced by the Service Building, which was built off the original backing of the Baxter Bank building. To a generation of Rutlanders, it has been called the Superman Building. Some would say in jest that if the Superman building could talk, it would whimsically say of the time it's seen, "The folks remain the same, only the clothes and music are different." Telegraphs to Apple iPhones, wagons to cars, oil lamps to electricity. The former Baxter Bank, now Service Building, has seen it all. .142 Merchants Row. The Bardwell House, built in 1852 by Otis Bardwell and E. Foster Cook on the corner of Washington Street and Merchants Row. In 1864, the Bardwell was purchased by John W. Crampton, and he enlarged the north end in 1869. During the Civil War era, a commercial center developed. This photo shows the fire station of Washington Engine Company in Depot Park on the right. In the center, where the present City Hall sits, is a busy lumber yard, and on the left is the Bardwell. In its 162 years, the Bardwell, like the Times, has changed its appearance. One such change happened on the cold day of December 30th, 1917, as a brutal fire had broken out and brave firemen battled the flames in freezing temperatures for hours. After the flames had been put out, some children described the Bardwell as a giant ice castle with rubble and debris. In 1910, the Bardwell served up another one of its delicious New Year's dinners, with such items as broiled fresh Kennebec salmon, grilled chicken halibut, boiled Virginia ham in a demi-glaze, and roast Vermont turkey, just to name a few. Veggies included creamed potatoes, Hubbard squash, little green peas, and young spinach. For dessert options, there were a number of frozen puddings and fresh pies. And to wash it all down, a variety of coffee, teas, and an interesting tall glass of golden russet cider. In this photo from 1900, the past, present, and future meet. On the left, a horse-drawn wagon. In the middle, a Rutland trolley car. And on the right, that still somewhat newfangled gadget called an automobile meet up on the crossroad of time. In 1908, Civil War veterans were reunited for this photo on the piazza of the Bardwell. On August 29, 1912, Theodore Roosevelt made his second visit to Rutland, speaking from the piazza of the Bardwell to an excited crowd of 5,000 Rutlanders. Some could almost imagine Teddy perhaps enjoying a few of those delicious Bardwell treats before leaving town to continue his campaign. The Bardwell, which had been light-colored, perhaps white, in 1880, was again painted white as seen here in the 1970s. In the fall of 1982, perhaps fall of 1983, it was decided to return it to its vintage brick color. A crew of people worked to carefully strip all traces of the white paint gently from the brick face of the Bardwell. As it turns out, this photo here shows a gentleman doing detailed window trim. That particular gentleman happens to be this narrator's dad, hard at work with the rest of the crew restoring the Bardwell building. Today, this building, rich in the very essence of Rutland history, is appropriately the home of Rutland seniors, a fitting home of wonderful history for the warm and wonderful elders of our community. Washington Street. Originally a wooden home, but by 1901 it became the Masonic Temple. The look of it has changed very little since then. In 1936, it watched the fire convention roll by. In 1958, it can be seen in the background as one of Rutland's finest gets ready to go on motorbike patrol. The sun shines bright on this day in 1979, and the Masonic Temple, with its familiar face, stands to this modern day virtually unaffected by the sands of time. Washington Street. After being a bustling wood mill, it became Village Hall and Town Hall. Originally built in 1872, it would become City Hall in 1892. In 1901, City Hall was damaged by a fire. Brick walls were reused in today's City Hall. City Hall served as headquarters for the Rutland Police Department. And on September 22, 1963, a special monument called the Final Beat was dedicated in honor of those of Rutland's finest who walked the final beat. That memorial still stands today. The building also served as the Rutland Fire Department, consisting of another group of Rutland's finest fighting against and investigating fires. Today, the police and fire departments have other locations in the city. The City Hall building has served many community purposes, and when the sun on a pretty day shines just right, the building takes on a wonderful red-orange glow. 34 Washington Street. In 1888, this was the home of Colonel James M. Putnam, who was a very successful coal dealer and part-time chief of police. Colonel James M. Putnam and his family rest in Evergreen Cemetery, where many citizens and luminaries of years past were laid to rest. 36 Washington Street, the John A. Meade Home. John Abner Meade, the great-great-grandson of James Meade, the first permanent settler of Rutland in 1770. John A. Meade was born in Fairhaven, Vermont. His studies at Middlebury College were interrupted while he served in the Vermont Volunteers for about 9 months during the Civil War. After graduating from Middlebury, he studied medicine at the College of Physicians and Surgeons of the Columbia University Medical College and became house physician at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. He later moved to his home in 1867, where he practiced medicine until 1888, when he was appointed chair in the medical department of the University of Vermont. When business pressures necessitated giving up his medical practice, he associated with a number of banking firms, served as a director of the Rutland Railroad, and president of the John A. Meade Manufacturing Company. In politics, he was a mayor of Rutland and then governor of Vermont. As mentioned earlier, in 1919, he donated the old Bank of Rutland building to the city for a community center for the families and children of Rutland. In January of the next year, Meade died in his home here in Rutland. The Meade family also rests in the Evergreen Cemetery in Rutland, Vermont. "25 Washington Street. In 1912, the home of George Jarvis, president of the Rutland Railroad. 26 Washington Street. In 1810, Moses Strong moved to Rutland, where he bought a property on the east side of South Main Street. By 1840, he was long since married, had a family, and settled into his new home on 61 South Main Street. Moses was not only an attorney and a judge of the county court, but he was also instrumental in bringing the Rutland Railroad through Rutland. In 1852, his son, George Strong, subdivided the land west of Main and south of West Streets that he inherited from his father, Moses. He then erected this elegant brick home on the newly laid Washington Street. Washington Street. By the post-Civil War era, this was the Wallace Clement home. Wallace Clement was very successful as a marble dealer. Today, it's the home of Vibe Portrait Art. B81, where Morse Place begins, which is believed to be where the first town hall was, which burned down in 1868. By 1875, it became Morse Place. Two Washington Street. In 1857, Captain Butman's widow lived here. The building has what is called a widow's walk. Mrs. Butman would go up there to look to see if her husband's ship was coming home. Today, it's the Clifford Funeral Home. "27 South Main Street. William Buttman, a retired sea captain, lived here in 1832. It later was the home of lawyer Solomon Foote, who was an opponent to slavery, who served as a U.S. representative and senator. Foote purchased the Buttman property, which included 2 houses and land just south of the present fire station. Foote was once described as 6 feet in height, lacking a fraction of an inch. 2 years before his death, he weighed 217 pounds. A well-sounding, sonorous voice. Despite having oddly large limbs, hands, and feet, he posed a dignified and commanding presence. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes this presentation of the Rutland Historical Society's virtual walking tour. As we hear that familiar sound telling us it's time to go home, I am reminded of the words of Rutland poet Julia C. Ardor. The sun come up, the sun goes down, the night mist shroudeth the sleeping town.